is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen, today. I know it's a little bit late for me doing this, but we're going to be talking about the hurricane season, or at least it's a little later than what I normally do. It's May 24th. Hurricane season in the Eastern Pacific has started already as of May 15th. The Atlantic hurricane season starts on June 1st, and since we still have about a week before hurricane season officially is underway, we're going to be talking about my thoughts, my predictions, my forecasts of what we're thinking about right here for this hurricane season, because, ladies and gentlemen, the off season is over, and we're back in the grind for the next 6 months for tropical weather, and then we'll talk about some other things as well. And with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So here's what we have going on right here. This is satellite imagery just to kind of give you some background stuff. You know, if you remember from last year, I did this quite a bit just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. But before we go into what I'm thinking about in the Atlantic hurricane season forecasts, we're going to talk about the weather that's going on right now. We do have an area of interest tagged in the Eastern Pacific Ocean as of right now, an 80% chance of formation in the next 7 days. So let's go ahead and read this out as of 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, which is 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Man, I'm excited to see these advisories once again and read those and go over them with you guys and all of that. Man, I've missed hurricane season. Not that it's all good and everything like that. I do not want hurricanes to impact people, obviously. There's a lot of stuff that happened last year with Helene, Milton, Beryl, and all those storms. But I'm really excited to kind of dive into the data of hurricane season once again. And let's go ahead and push into it. An area of low pressure is expected to form early next week, several hundred miles south of the southern coast of Mexico. Conditions appear favorable for development for this system, and a tropical depression is likely to form around the middle part of next week while moving westward to west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Formation chance in the next 48 hours is low, near 0%. I don't even think the low pressure system has entered that region yet. And the formation chance in the next 7 days is at high, which is 80%. If you see a 0.80, that should tell you how confident the NHC is going forward and how confident they are this early out that this is going to develop. And I know this is an Atlantic hurricane season or anything like that, but I do show this advisory right here to kind of show you what we're potentially going to be looking at. If you're seeing a scenario where it's 0.80, 0 in the next 48 hours, 80% in the next 7 days, that kind of enhances the confidence the National Hurricane Center has of a more long-term threat. More of a short-term threat, you would see more maybe like along the lines of like 50 or 60 to 80, and not really jumping up to 90 or even 100% at that current point. I just thought I'd pan that out and kind of give you an example of what we're potentially going to be looking at. But by and large, what we have going on here is a tropical wave that's going to be moving off and developing. And a lot of models do have this strengthening up to potentially hurricane strength, but it doesn't look like it's going to be impacting much land or anything like that, which is some good news. But why are we talking about this if this isn't going to be impacting people? Well, I do feel like this is a good thing to start with hurricane season, especially just to kind of get back into the groove of things for me personally, since I haven't done a hurricane video since November. And it also kind of will help my team, and we can kind of analyze this stuff. For example, on the streams, we can talk about the risk there as well as just the general risk of what we're looking at in the Atlantic by and large. So that's kind of just a general introduction to what we're doing here, and just I thought I'd pan this out and kind of give you an idea of what we're potentially looking at. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season forecast. So let's go ahead and start with what we have going on with the ENSO forecast. The ENSO, for those of you who do not know, it's kind of the oscillation cycle off the coast in the Eastern Pacific Ocean that determines whether an El Nino or La Nina is going to be happening, or if it's just a neutral phase right now. Based as of right now, we are under a very slight negative neutral phase right now based on the climatological data and the ocean analysis, which I will show you in just a second. But here's the situation that we have going on. As of mid-May, the equatorial Pacific is in ENSO neutral state with sea surface temperatures that are close to average for April 2025. The ENSO plume forecast indicates a high probability of the neutral conditions and from May to June, but then as hurricane season ramps up through August, October, they remain around 50%, but the chances of a La Nina do increase from about like 10% for June, July, August, all the way to the September, October, November, or October, November, December area to over 40%. So we do see a higher probability of a La Nina happening, or at least a very negatively neutral neutral ENSO stage. I've been talking to Weather Center Nazario about that as well. I've been watching his Instagram and all of that stuff, kind of keeping up with him about this. This is going to be very interesting to see how this pans out. But ultimately, we have a lot of stuff going on. During the forecast period, neither El Nino nor La Nina shows a strong preference, though La Nina has a slightly higher chances compared to the El Nino. That's kind of a given. And here's the sea surface temperature anomalies. They did go back up this last year. Now they went back down. Then they kind of oscillated. They're back down to the negative neutral phase as of right now, and the models show a relatively stable decline to the negative neutral phase. 0.5, negative 0.5 or 0.5 is what you want to see for an La Nina or El Nino, respectively. If you see a negative 0.5 reading of the SST anomalies, you're in a La Nina. If you see a positive 0.5 anomaly, you're in an El Nino. And why am I talking about this? Well, La Ninas generally tend to favor more storms and more tropical development. El Nino favors less typically. But there is also a bit of a gray area as well. 2023, I'm sure we all remember this, very big El Nino phase, but it was still a very active hurricane season with 20 named storms. Why was this? Well, the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic Ocean completely canceled out what was going on in the ENSO region, and that's why you didn't see a decrease in storms, rather an increase compared to 2022. 2024, we saw around the same in terms of what we saw from 2023, despite the allegedly better conditions. There was more Sahara dust that came in that was kind of unexpected, and the shear took a little bit longer than what we were initially anticipating for it to weaken. But by the time we got to August, we were in boom, 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 boom. We saw a very active very active phase from late August all the way until mid-October. We had a lot of stuff that was going on with that, and we're going to have to pay very close attention to that as well. So that's why I'm bringing this up, just to kind of show you the face. Now, what's kind of the sweet spot in terms of hurricane season? What I've noticed is a negative neutral to weak La Nina is probably the best for active hurricane season. And why do I say this? Why do I bring this up? Well, the reason being is if you have a too strong of a La Nina, it weakens the trade wind so much where there's not enough shear for hurricanes and tropical cyclones to develop, because tropical cyclones do require some shear. Yes, I know. They do require some shear, like a good 5-10 knots of wind shear. If you get below that, the storms aren't exactly going to develop. You need some of that vertical tilt to allow for those thunderstorms to develop and keep the updrafts out of the downdrafts out of the updrafts, all of that stuff. That's basic Met 103 things right there. But if you have too much shear, then it's going to completely tear the hurricane apart. And what's too much shear? I'd say anything over 15 knots, although I have seen stuff develop in as high shear elements as 30, 40, even 50 knots, as in the case of Hurricane Fiona back in 2022. So there is a bit of a sweet spot with the ENSO, and for also I kind of alluded to this, the El Nino and La Nina determine how strong the trade winds are going to be. El Nino means stronger trade winds and stronger wind shear. La Nina means weaker trade winds and weaker wind shear, generally. But you can't have too weak wind shear with a strong La Nina, or you're not going to have so very much organized convection develop. But instead, what we're going to see from what I'm seeing is the most probable scenario is a negative neutral phase this year, and that's going to make this hurricane season more active. The NOAA actually came out with their forecast, as a matter of fact. Let me go ahead and pull that up for you, Hurricane Forecast 2025, and I'm going to break this down for you very quickly. They are predicting a above normal 2025 hurricane season and above average Atlantic Ocean temperatures set the stage for this. And here's their probabilistic. They have 60% of probability of above normal, 30% near normal, and 10% below normal. And I've been saying this for years. Above average is becoming the new average. The average is about 14.4 named storms, I believe 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. That's the 30-year mean from 1991 to 2020. We're looking at another above average season right here, according to these forecasts right here. They are predicting 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And that's what we're potentially doing. It's not going to be a hyperactive hurricane season like a lot of forecasts were predicting last year, but it is going to be an active hurricane season, and we're going to see above average storms and above average intensity probably. And why do I say above average intensity? Well, look at the climate reanalyzer right here. We're seeing above average sea surface temperatures right here. Not nearly what we were seeing last year. 2024 levels were absolutely bonkers for the early parts of hurricane season, but they eventually did decrease below what we saw in 2023 by just a little bit, but they were still very, very warm, to say the very least. I would say what kind of changed a lot of stuff was Hurricane Beryl when it barreled through the Caribbean and cooled some of those temperatures off just a little bit. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing a pretty big uptick in sea surface temperatures, although we are at about around 2022 levels of sea surface temperatures, so that's not bad at all or anything like that. And I know 2022 was around an average hurricane season, but that was mainly because the shear and the dry air did not let up until early September. We were expecting things to start calming down in late July, early August. It took over a month later for the Sahara air layer and for the wind shear to weaken to a point where tropical development was plausible, and that's why you didn't see any named storms in August at that current point. But now, that was also. But I just wanted to make that clear. It was not because of the temperatures or anything like that. It was because of wind shear and moisture that were not playing with it. But why do I bring this up? Just to kind of give you analyze my forecast right here and kind of give you another layer as to what I'm thinking is going to be happening. Well, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit to the Gulf of Mexico right here, ladies and gentlemen. We've been seeing a pretty big surge over the last 10 days. We're approaching 2024 levels in the Gulf of Mexico. That is an area I'm pretty concerned about, especially with hurricanes entering there and potentially making landfall in the U.S. coast. We saw 4 hurricanes make landfall in the Gulf Coast last year. Hurricane Beryl in Texas. Actually, no, I think it was 5. Hurricane Debbie in August in the Big Bend region of Florida. Then you had Hurricane Francine, which ended up making landfall near New Orleans in Louisiana. Then you had Hurricane Helene in the Big Bend of Florida and Hurricane Milton in Tampa Bay. And all those storms are pretty destructive, except for the exception of Debbie. Every storm is destructive in its own way, but with the exception of Hurricane Debbie, since it was a mid-range Category 1 and its structure wasn't organizing on time, every single one of those storms was destructive in one way or another. Helene and Milton especially were very destructive as well. So that's why I'm paying attention to this right here. So that's what we're looking at with the temperatures. Let's look at the wind shear, both current and modeled. Wind shear, this is what you'd expect for late May, early June. Not a lot of favorable conditions for wind shear. The shear is pretty strong around here. This is mainly because of the troughs and ridges and all that stuff. But starting around mid June to late June, you are going to see some weakening in parts of the MDR at times, as well as parts of the Caribbean Sea at times, and that's when you start to see your first tropical development, typically your first phase of it. And then then the shear picks back up in July, and then starting around the last 2 weeks of July going into early August, you're going to start seeing more of the wind shear decrease, and that's what we're potentially going to be watching and paying attention to at this current point in time. So that's what we have for the current wind shear. Here's the modeled wind shear. We can pull that up. Oh man, it's so good. It's so good to be back to tropical tidbits. But I will show both the regular wind shear and the anomaly wind shear from the GFS. Actually, no, I'm going to use a climate model. I'm going to use the CANSIPs to see if I can get some modeled. Yep, here's the shear anomaly. Okay, they don't have that up. We'll have to use, okay, they don't have that. I'll try the NMME, see if I can pull that up. No, that's mainly moisture right there. I'll try the CFS monthly, see if I can pull that up. Okay, perfect. Yep, we can. So here's what we have for June. What we're expecting for June is weaker than average wind shear in the eastern MDR, and also very much weaker than average in the subtropical Atlantic Ocean, which is actually quite which is actually quite I wouldn't necessarily say alarming, but that is interesting to see that. But you're also seeing stronger than average wind shear in parts of the Caribbean and parts of the Western MDR where those are at most risk. So I would say at least until late June, I wouldn't be too worried about hurricane season at this current point. But as we get into July, what a turnaround. You're seeing much less wind shear in the Caribbean and the Gulf regions, the Western Atlantic Ocean right here. That is a pretty big reversal from what we were seeing previously. Yes, you do see some increases in wind shear in the subtropical Atlantic, but that is a massive reversal. And I would say that starting in July, if you're in the Caribbean, if you're in the Gulf Coast, if you're in Central America, I would pay more attention to this right here, especially with these forecasted shear anomalies that we have for you right here. And then if we go into August, yes, the MDR does get a little bit stronger than average in terms of wind shear, but by that point, you don't see that much wind shear across that region of the tropics, and ultimately you're going to start seeing boom, 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 more of these Cape Verde setups and more of these tropical waves start to organize and develop. And September is slightly below average in the areas you don't want them to be, and is slightly above in a few isolated pockets. October is also pretty concerning as well, because you're seeing a lot more below average wind shear according to these forecasts compared to what we were seeing previously. Like normally October shear starts to pick back up, but this run is indicating that the wind shear is going to remain about the same and decrease, and if actually quite below average in a lot of these areas that could get impacted the most in October. So yeah, so that's what we're paying attention to right there as my smoke detector test continues to go through. I apologize for that. I think it adds to the atmosphere a little bit. And then November, as hurricane season dies down, that low wind shear is mainly concentrated in the greater and lesser Antilles as well as Central America, which that I'm not particularly that surprised about. Last thing I'm going to go ahead and show you is the moisture and kind of show you what we're potentially looking at with that. Let's go ahead and look at monthly precip anomalies. So here's the situation that we have. Let's go back to June. June is going to be relatively dry in parts of the main development region, but it's also going to be pretty moist according to these runs in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the Caribbean and all these areas. Now, a lot of this is generally more mesoscale convection, like cells that pop up and then die down and all that stuff. But why am I showing this? Well, mainly because every little bit of rain that you see on here, that's going to help moisten up the atmosphere, and that's going to be one of those components that allow for tropical development. And if we do see tropical development, it is more likely in these more moist than average areas right here in the Western Pacific, not the Pacific, Western Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico. Those areas could see more tropical development, or at least have a higher probability of that in June. Going to July, things do get a bit drier across much of the MDR and in the Caribbean and all that. August, September, you're kind of starting to see some more noise with this. I'm going to go ahead and check the NMME with this as well. We're seeing more so like average. Like this is not something you're seeing conclusively. This is more noise than anything, honestly, right here. But you are seeing around average moisture and all of that with that this is going to work. I know last year with the runs we were seeing incredible amounts of moisture. Everything looked like it was going to be aligning very closely, but ultimately things did not pan out as the models forecasted, showing the CANSIPs as well. Okay, the CANSIPs is really going haywire with this right here. We'll have to see how this pans out. I want to check the April forecast. This is pretty consistent right here. I'm going to wait for the June runs to kind of get a better consensus of this, but the CANSIPs wants a lot more moisture than what we are potentially wanting for a lot of these areas, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, why am I bringing all this up? What's my forecast with this? Here's what I'm looking at right here. I think for right now, 17 named storms 8 to 10 hurricanes, and I'd say about 4 to 6 major hurricanes is the most likely guess based on what I'm just seeing for right now. But that obviously can change. There are certain factors that we're potentially seeing that's different. I do think there's a possibility we could see up to 20 named storms this year. I do think there's a possibility we could see as little as maybe like 14 or so, like we saw in 2022. But we'll have to see how these factors pan out. We're going to have to see how all of this happens, and we'll continue to update you here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. I am considering a live stream tonight, although because I'm going to be doing some other stuff, it's going to be kind of late, around 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, to answer more of your questions, to kind of get back in the groove of things, and to kind of get the tropical team at Storms United ready to go for when hurricane season ramps up. So I will keep you updated on that. But with that being said, we are going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to join us with the Storms United Discord server, be sure to join. It's the link in the end screen. But with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.